There is a strange and uncomfortable truth that almost nobody talks about in our modern world, which is that the most powerful people in any field are rarely the ones who went through the most formal education. They are the ones who, at some point in their lives, took complete responsibility for their own learning and went far deeper into a subject than any school would ever have asked them to go. This kind of person is what I have come to think of as dangerously self-educated. Not because they are dangerous in any harmful sense, but because they have developed a depth of understanding that makes them genuinely formidable in a way that credentialed but shallow thinkers can never match. They see things other people miss, they connect ideas across domains, and they can work problems through to conclusions that surprise even the experts. What is interesting is that the path to this kind of self-education has very little to do with how much you read or how many courses you take. It has everything to do with how you actually relate to knowledge itself. Most people who attempt to educate themselves do so in ways that produce almost no real understanding because they are using methods that were never designed for depth. The older Japanese tradition, particularly within its long history of master and apprentice learning, has thought deeply about what actually produces real knowledge in a human mind, and the principles it has developed offer a much more reliable path than the modern habit of consuming endless content. This video is about that path and how you can use it to become genuinely, dangerously self-educated. The first principle, and perhaps the most important of all, is that understanding must always come before reading. Most people approach self-education by trying to consume as much material as possible, treating books and articles and videos as if the act of passing them through your eyes were the same as learning. The Japanese tradition of deep study suggests a completely different approach. There is a concept called rikai, which means to grasp something so thoroughly that it has become part of you, and it is treated as fundamentally different from the surface activity of reading. The shift from reading to rikai requires you to slow down dramatically. Instead of finishing a chapter, you might spend an entire afternoon on 3 pages, breaking the ideas into smaller and smaller parts until each one is fully clear in your mind. You close your eyes after reading a passage and visualize what was just described, building the concept in your imagination until you can see it clearly without the book in front of you. You then test whether you actually understand it by imagining that you are explaining the idea to someone who knows nothing about the subject, because if you cannot explain something simply, you do not yet truly understand it. This kind of slow, deep, deliberate engagement produces more real knowledge in 3 pages than ordinary reading produces in 300. The dangerously self-educated person reads less than most people, but understands far more because every piece of material has been genuinely absorbed rather than merely consumed. The second principle concerns the choice of domain, and it is something almost everyone gets wrong at the beginning of their self-education journey. Most people, when they decide to take their learning seriously, try to study many things at once. They read about philosophy in the morning, history in the afternoon, and economics in the evening, hoping that the breadth itself will make them well-rounded. The Japanese tradition of mastery teaches almost the opposite. There is an old principle called ichige ni hairu, which means to enter deeply into one art, and it suggests that the path to becoming genuinely formidable runs through depth in a single domain rather than scattered shallow exposure to many. The reasoning behind this is psychological as much as practical. When you go deep into one subject, you eventually reach a level where you begin to see the underlying structures that connect knowledge itself, and this insight transfers to every other domain you later approach. The person who has truly mastered one thing has actually learned how to learn, while the person who has dabbled in 20 things has learned only how to dabble. The choice of your one main area is therefore one of the most important decisions in your self-education. It should be something you can imagine spending several years inside without losing interest, something that connects to the deeper questions you find yourself returning to throughout your life. Once you have chosen this domain, everything else becomes secondary, and you protect your focus on it with a quiet stubbornness that may seem strange to people around you, but which is the actual source of the depth they will later admire. The third principle is one I learned from reading about the journals of Japanese scholars and craftsmen, and it has changed my own learning more than almost anything else. The principle is the practice of keeping what I now call a thinking document, which is a private written space where you develop your understanding through writing rather than simply through reading. This is fundamentally different from taking notes. Notes are a record of what you have read, while a thinking document is a record of what you have come to think. In Japanese intellectual tradition, particularly within the practice of careful daily reflection, writing has long been understood as a form of thinking rather than a record of thinking already completed. When you write your thoughts down, you are forced to make them clear enough to exist on paper, and this act of clarification reveals everything you do not yet actually understand. The vague ideas in your mind, which felt complete while they remained unspoken, suddenly show their gaps and contradictions when you try to put them into written sentences. Over time, your thinking document becomes a living conversation with yourself, where you return to old ideas and revise them, notice patterns across months and years of your own thinking, and develop the kind of slow, deep clarity that no amount of reading alone can produce. My grandfather Daiki kept this kind of document for over 40 years, and the depth of his thinking near the end of his life was something that simply could not have been built any other way. The dangerously self-educated person writes constantly, not for an audience, but for their own thinking, because the writing is itself the engine of their growing understanding. The fourth principle is the one where most self-education projects quietly fail, and it concerns the relationship between knowledge and application. Most people who study seriously eventually accumulate a great deal of theoretical knowledge that never actually enters their lives. They can speak about ideas, recognize references, and follow conversations about their domain, but the knowledge remains essentially decorative, like furniture in a room that no one ever uses. The Japanese tradition of mastery has always insisted that knowledge becomes real only through application, through the slow process of trying to use what you have learnt in actual situations until the understanding moves from your mind into your hands and your judgment. There is a concept called jissen, which refers to the bringing of knowledge into lived practice, and it is treated as the moment when learning actually becomes real. The implication for self-education is that every significant idea you encounter should be tested against your actual life as soon as possible. If you are studying philosophy, you should be applying its principles to your daily decisions. If you are studying economics, you should be making predictions about real markets and tracking whether your predictions hold. If you are studying writing, you should be writing things that real people will read. The knowledge that gets applied takes root in you, while the knowledge that stays purely theoretical eventually fades, no matter how carefully you originally studied it. The dangerously self-educated person is recognizable by the visible imprint of their learning on their actual life, because their understanding has flowed through them into the world rather than remaining trapped inside their head. When you bring these four principles together, what emerges is a complete plan for becoming the kind of self-educated person who can stand alongside and often beyond the credentialed experts in any field. You read less than other people but understand far more, because every piece of material has been broken down, visualized, and explained back to yourself until it has become genuinely yours. You concentrate your learning in a single chosen domain, going deep enough that the structure of the knowledge itself begins to reveal patterns that scattered learners can never see. You write your thinking down in a private document that grows alongside you, revising your ideas over months and years until the clarity of your thought becomes something almost no one around you can match. And you apply everything you learn as quickly as possible to real situations, because the knowledge that does not enter your life never truly becomes part of you. What makes this kind of self-education dangerous in the best sense is that it produces a quality of mind that the modern educational system rarely creates. The dangerously self-educated person does not need anyone to tell them what to think, because they have developed the capacity to think things through carefully on their own.